Put it away! I don't care what that says." He flicked it, 2 fingers, the way you'd flick a poker chip across a table that wasn't yours. The badge wallet hit the pavement and slid 4 inches and stopped. The badge was gold. It read, "City of Hartford, Internal Affairs Division." The woman who had produced it was standing with her hands at her sides, perfectly still, on the sidewalk outside the Millbrook Avenue convenience store at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. Her name was Claudette O'Say. She had not moved. Officer Raymond Pruitt stood between her and her car. He was 6'2", 44 years old, 14 years on the force, and he had been watching her walk to her car from across the parking lot for the last 3 minutes. He had watched the way she carried herself. He had decided something. He had stepped in front of her vehicle before she reached the door. "License and registration," he had said. "You were in that store for 11 minutes. She had looked at him. She had produced her badge wallet. He had flicked it onto the ground. Now he crossed his arms. "I said license and registration. That badge doesn't mean what you think it means out here." Her eyes moved to the badge on the pavement. She had carried that badge for 9 years. She had earned it on a Tuesday morning in a ceremony her mother had driven 4 hours to attend. She looked back at Pruitt. She did not pick it up. A teenager on a bicycle slowed at the edge of the lot. He watched. He reached into his hoodie pocket but didn't pull his phone out all the way. A man in a parked sedan on the other side of the street sat very still and watched through his windshield. A woman pushing a stroller on the sidewalk picked up her pace without turning her head. Claudette O'Say bent down. She picked up her badge. She brushed the concrete dust off the leather wallet with 2 fingers. She placed it back inside her jacket. She did not reach for her license. He had no idea. Because the woman he had just stopped in this parking lot, the woman whose badge he had thrown on the ground like trash, had, sitting in a locked drawer in her office on the 3rd floor of the Hartford Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, a case file that was currently 31 pages long. The file had a name on the cover tab. The name was Pruitt, Raymond D., badge 4471. And in 72 hours, that file would be on the desk of the Chief of Police, the city's Corporation Counsel, and a federal civil rights investigator named Tomas Reyes, who had been waiting 8 months for exactly this kind of incident to complete the pattern. They just didn't know it yet. But this story doesn't start here. Go back 11 months. Go back to a morning in late September when a woman named Dolores Whitfield walked into the Hartford Police Department and asked to speak to someone in internal affairs. She was 67 years old. She had a plastic bag from a CVS in one hand and a folded sheet of notebook paper in the other. She sat in a waiting room chair for 34 minutes. When someone finally came out to speak with her, she handed over the piece of paper. On it, she had written down, in careful cursive, the badge number of the officer who had stopped her son on a Tuesday evening 4 months prior, yanked him out of his car without cause, and held him face down on the asphalt for 11 minutes while the engine of his car ran. Her son was 24 years old. He had been on his way home from a shift at a hospital where he worked as a radiology technician. He had not been charged with anything. The woman who received Dolores Whitfield's piece of paper was Claudette O'Say. Claudette Adwoa O'Say was 43 years old. She had grown up 20 minutes from that waiting room in a neighborhood where the relationship between the residents and the police department could be measured in the gap between the language of the department's official mission statement and the lived experience of every family on her block. She had watched that gap her entire life. She had decided at 22, during her second year of criminal justice studies at the University of Connecticut, that she was going to work inside it, not because she believed the institution was good, because she believed it could be made less harmful, one documented case at a time, by people who understood both its language and its damage. She had joined the department at 25, spent 8 years in patrol, in plain clothes, in a downtown precinct where she became known as the officer who wrote everything down. Every stop, every interaction, every deviation from procedure that her colleagues treated as routine. She had transferred to internal affairs at 33, made investigator first class at 37, and had spent the last 6 years doing one thing with a precision that her supervisors described, in her annual reviews, as methodical, a word that in that building meant something close to relentless. On her desk at home sat a single item she had placed there years ago, before she understood exactly why. A small framed print with 4 words in plain black type. Evidence, documentation, precision, truth. She had bought it at a craft fair. She did not know the artist. She had known, when she saw it, that it described what she believed about how change was possible. She had opened the Pruitt file on the first day of October. By October 15th, it was 12 pages. By November, 19. By January, she had located 4 additional complainants whose reports had been closed by the same supervisor without investigation. All 4 were black. All 4 had stopped expecting anything to come of their complaints. She had called each one. She had explained what she was building and what it required. 3 of them had agreed to provide formal statements. The 4th had said only, "Make sure it sticks this time." Raymond Pruitt had joined the department 14 years ago. He had 4 commendations in his file. 2-time recipient of the district's Community Service Award. His photograph was on a recruitment brochure that had been distributed at 2 career fairs. His sergeant considered him one of the most proactive officers in the district. In 14 years, he had received 26 complaints from members of the public. 26. All 26 had been reviewed by the same supervising lieutenant. All 26 had been closed with the notation, "Reviewed, no action required." The lieutenant's name was Gareth Muldoon. He and Pruitt had been partners for 3 years before Muldoon's promotion. Claudette had a separate file on Muldoon. It was 14 pages long. She kept it in the same locked drawer. She had been 6 weeks from completing her case when Raymond Pruitt stepped in front of her car in the Millbrook Avenue parking lot. She had been on her way home. She had stopped for a bottle of water and a bag of crackers. She had been inside the store for 11 minutes because she had stood in line for 7 of them. When she came out, he was already watching. She stood in the parking lot now, badge back in her jacket, hands at her sides. Pruitt had not moved. His hand had drifted toward his belt. His radio crackled once and went quiet. He glanced at the teenager on the bicycle, then back at Claudette, with the specific confidence of a man who had done this before and had never once faced a consequence for it. He had done it 26 times before. Each time, the case had landed on Muldoon's desk. Each time, Muldoon had written the same 4 words and closed the file. He had no reason to believe tonight was different. "Last chance," he said. "License and registration, or we can do this the other way." Claudette counted. She had been counting since the moment he stepped in front of the car. Stop without cause. Demand without reasonable suspicion. Physical contact with her personal property. Failure to acknowledge a fellow officer's credentials. She was on 4. She would be on 5 in approximately 30 seconds if he continued. She had written this sequence into case files for 9 years. She knew every violation by its legal name, its code section, its precedent in state disciplinary proceedings. She was not frightened. She was working. She said, "Officer, I am a member of this department. I have identified myself. I am going to reach into my jacket for my phone." "Don't! I am going to reach into my jacket for my phone," she said again in the same tone. "And I am going to call my supervisor. You are welcome to remain here." She reached into her jacket. He took a step toward her. She stopped. "Back up," she said. "Quiet. Exact. Badge 4471. This is being documented." Something moved across his face. It was not recognition. He did not know who she was. It was something closer to irritation. The irritation of a man who is not accustomed to being spoken to with this particular caliber of calm. He was used to a different response. He had built 14 years of behavior on a different response. He leaned slightly forward with the posture of someone about to give an instruction that they fully expected to be followed. He did not back up. He took one more step and reached for her arm. She let him take her arm. She let him walk her to the side of the car. She let all of it happen, and she stood with her palms out, everything visible, everything documented in the operating system of her memory that had been running without pause since the moment his hand hit her badge wallet. Her face was still. Her breathing was even. She was counting violation number 5. The teenager on the bicycle finally pulled out his phone. He started filming. He didn't say anything. He just held it up and kept it steady. 47 minutes into Pruitt's shift that night, he had stopped 3 other people on this same stretch of Millbrook Avenue. All 3 were black. He had written no citations. He had made no arrests. He had, in his own accounting, simply been present in the area. This was a phrase that appeared 11 times in his incident reports across a 14-year career, always paired with stops that produced no charges and generated no paperwork other than the mental notes of the people he had stopped. People who sometimes wrote those notes down on paper and carried them into a waiting room and handed them to someone who kept a locked drawer. The man in the sedan across the street had been there for 6 minutes. His name was Calvin Osei. He was Claudette's younger brother. He was 38 years old, a former Army intelligence analyst who had spent 2 tours reading pattern data in environments where missing a pattern meant people died. He had driven his sister to the store because her car was in the shop, and he was waiting for her to come back out. He had watched everything from the moment Pruitt stepped in front of the car. He had dialed 911 at the moment Pruitt reached for her arm. He had also, in the same motion, sent a text message to a number saved in his phone under the initials TR. Tomas Reyes had his phone on the nightstand. He read the text in 11 seconds. He was dressed and out the door in 4 minutes. 22 minutes left. Inside the store, a cashier named Priya, who had watched the entire interaction through the plate glass window, had her manager pull up the parking lot security footage and save it to a USB drive before anyone asked her to. Pruitt ran her name through his patrol car terminal. He typed it the wrong way, twice. The third time, it came back clean. No warrants, no record. A department ID with an internal affairs designation that the terminal displayed in a field he had never seen populated before. He stared at the screen. He looked at the designation. His jaw moved slightly. He had no idea what that field meant. He should have. It had been in the officer training manual since 2019. He got out of his car. He walked back to where Claudette was standing. His stride had changed by 4 inches. It was shorter now. "Says here you're with IA," he said. "Yes," she said. "Why didn't you just say that?" Claudette looked at him for a long moment. The parking lot was quiet. The teenager was still filming. Calvin had crossed the street and was standing 12 feet away. In the distance, two other sets of headlights were turning into the lot, one a patrol supervisor's vehicle, one a dark sedan she recognized. "I did," she said. "You threw my badge on the ground." Pruitt's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Tomas Reyes stepped out of the dark sedan. He was 49 years old, 12 years with the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, currently on temporary assignment to the State Attorney's Office as part of an ongoing review of complaint handling practices inside the Hartford PD. He was the federal investigator Claudette had been coordinating with for 8 months. He had 2 copies of the Pruitt file, one on his person, one in a secured digital repository. He walked past Pruitt without looking at him and stopped in front of Claudette. "You all right?" he said. "Documenting," she said. He nodded once. He looked at Pruitt. He said, "Officer, don't go anywhere." The patrol supervisor arrived 30 seconds later. His name was Sergeant Dennis Achebe, and he had been contacted not by dispatch but by the same text Calvin had sent, because Calvin and Achebe had served in the same unit in Kandahar in 2009, and because Calvin had learned, 11 months ago, the same thing Claudette had learned 11 months ago, that in this city you built your network before you needed it. Achebe looked at the scene. He looked at Pruitt. He looked at Claudette, who was standing with her hands visible and her expression composed, and her eyes already distant in the way they got when she was cataloging. "Pruitt," Achebe said. "Badge?" Pruitt blinked. "What?" "Your badge. Surrender it." This was not standard protocol for a parking lot. It was the kind of instruction that came from something Achebe had already received, an authorization he had been waiting to act on, signed that morning by a deputy chief who had been briefed by Tomas Reyes the previous afternoon. Pruitt's hand went to his badge. His hand stopped. He looked at Claudette. He looked at Achebe. He looked at Reyes. He unclipped his badge. He placed it in Achebe's palm. It made a sound when it landed. A small sound, a flat, metallic click against skin. The teenager's phone captured it. The video would be viewed 2.3 million times before the end of the week. Claudette spoke to Pruitt once before they took him to the supervisor's vehicle. She had said everything she needed to say already, to the people who needed to hear it. Her report, her file, her 31 pages of documented pattern. But she said this directly to him, standing 3 feet away, in the same quiet voice she had used all evening. "I have been building your file for 11 months, she said. "I want you to know that. Not because it changes tonight, but because I want you to understand that everything you did in those 11 months, every stop, every complaint that Muldoon closed, every family that wrote down a badge number and brought it to a waiting room, all of it is in the file. Every one of them is in there." She paused. "This was number 27. Pruitt said nothing. The color had left his face in a way that was specific and physical. It started at the temples and moved downward, like something draining. "Badge 4471, she said quietly. "Documented." She turned and walked to her brother's car. The full case came down in 6 weeks. Raymond Pruitt was terminated on the 31st day following a Departmental Review Board hearing at which 4 complainants gave testimony, including Dolores Whitfield, who drove herself there and sat in the front row and did not look away. The federal civil rights investigation, which Tomas Reyes had been building in parallel, resulted in a consent agreement between the City of Hartford and the DOJ's Civil Rights Division that mandated independent oversight of all internal complaint reviews, removal of the Complaint Review Authority from direct supervisors with personal relationships to the officers being reviewed, and mandatory retraining for any officer who had received more than 5 complaints in a rolling 24-month period. Gareth Muldoon retired on a Thursday. He submitted his paperwork the morning after the consent agreement was announced. He did not hold a ceremony. He did not give interviews. He cleared his desk in 40 minutes. The pension review that followed his retirement identified 8 complaint files that had been improperly closed. All 8 were reopened. The parking lot security footage was entered into the federal record. The teenager's video was cited in the DOJ's press release as an example of the role of community documentation in accountability proceedings. His name was Marcus Teal. He was 17 years old. He was not identified publicly at his family's request. 6 months later, he enrolled in a criminal justice pre-law program at a community college 20 minutes from the Millbrook Avenue store. The man in the sedan was acknowledged only once in official documentation, as a witness who had initiated a 911 call. Calvin Osei attended his sister's departmental commendation ceremony in March and stood in the back of the room in a gray suit and did not speak to any reporters. The woman pushing the stroller made a statement to the DOJ investigator's office 2 weeks after the incident. She had turned her head away that night because she was afraid. Her statement said exactly that. The investigator thanked her. Her statement was included. What she had seen, and what she had turned away from, and what she had chosen to document anyway, 2 weeks later, on paper, with her name at the bottom, was part of the record. Claudette Osei received a promotion to senior investigator 7 months after the parking lot. She requested, in the same week, that her case be assigned to a new officer who had submitted a complaint the previous Tuesday. The complainant was a 61-year-old woman who had been stopped while walking to her mailbox. The complaint had been filed in the same waiting room where Dolores Whitfield had sat and waited with her piece of notebook paper. The new case file was 1 page long. She put it in the drawer. She opened her laptop. She began. On the drive home that evening, she passed the Millbrook Avenue store. The parking lot was lit. The pavement where Pruitt had thrown her badge was indistinguishable from any other section of concrete. She did not slow down. Her mother called that night, the way she called every Tuesday. They talked for 40 minutes about other things entirely. At the very end, her mother said, "You still eating?" "I'm still eating," Claudette said. "And working too hard." "Yes." A pause. Then her mother said what she had been saying since Claudette was 22 years old, studying in a cold apartment, writing down everything. "Then keep going." Claudette kept going. She always had. Someone had to be watching. And in this city, on this job, with this file and the next file and the one after that, she had decided, a long time ago, that it would be her. If this story made you feel something tonight, share it. Not for the algorithm, for Dolores Whitfield, who drove herself to a waiting room and waited 34 minutes with a piece of notebook paper and a badge number written in cursive. For every family that did the same and never heard anything back. For every person who pressed record. Drop a comment below. Have you ever documented something wrong, filed a complaint, wrote it down, told someone, and watched nothing happen? What does real accountability look like in your community? Subscribe for more stories that name the pattern and honor the people building the file. Because the file is how it ends. Every time.